Late night shifts at a quiet Walmart in rural Louisiana should have been boring, but the rules were anything but normal. No eye contact with the greeter after midnight, never go into aisle 9 alone, and if you hear your name whispered over the intercom, run. I thought they were just creepy jokes, until I broke one. Now something in the store knows I'm here, and it's hunting me. Welcome back to Dr. Snooze, where the night is never quiet and the stories are never safe. Tonight's tale will pull you deep into the eerie aisles of a small-town Walmart, where the rules aren't just strange, they're deadly. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and settle in. And hey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another chilling night with us. When I first applied for the night shift at the Walmart in Oak Hollow, I thought it would be an easy job. The place was small compared to the big city stores, and the quiet of rural Louisiana seemed like a perfect escape from the chaos I'd left behind in Baton Rouge. The hiring manager, a tired woman named Mrs. Greaves, didn't ask me much. She just slid a paper across the table, told me the hours, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and said, if you're willing to follow the rules, you'll do fine here. The way she said it stuck with me. It wasn't the casual, corporate rules you hear about. Clock in on time, wear your name tag, greet customers. No, she said it like those rules were life and death. At the time, I figured she just meant the store manager was strict. I was wrong. My first shift started on a Tuesday night. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few rusted trucks and an old sedan that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks. The streetlights flickered in and out, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes it hard to breathe. Inside, the store was dimmer than I expected. Most of the lights in the far aisles were off, and a faint hum came from somewhere near the electronics section. Mrs. Greaves met me at the front, holding a clipboard. She was wearing the same faded blue vest I'd seen in the interview, but now I noticed a small silver charm pinned to it. A strange, almost insect-like shape I couldn't identify. You're new, she said flatly. Before you do anything else, you need to know the rules. She handed me a laminated sheet. The list was short, maybe 10 rules, but each one felt oddly specific. I read them aloud, half amused. 1. Never look at the security cameras between 2:13 a.m. and 2:17 a.m. 2. If you hear knocking from aisle 14 after midnight, do not investigate. 3. Do not make eye contact with the greeter after 3 a.m. 4. If you see a shopping cart moving on its own, ignore it. 5. Never let a customer into the store after closing time, even if they insist they were just inside. 6. Do not touch the mannequins in the clothing section. 7. If the intercom says clean up on aisle 0, hide in the break room until further notice. 8. Keep your name tag on at all times. If it goes missing, tell Mrs. Greaves immediately. 9. When the lights flicker 3 times, lock yourself in the restroom until they stop. 10. Do not under any circumstances go near the back freezer after 1:30 a.m. I laughed nervously, expecting her to tell me it was some sort of employee initiation joke, but she didn't smile. She just stared at me, her pale eyes unblinking. These are not suggestions, she said. Follow them and you'll keep your job, and more importantly, you'll stay alive. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and slipped the laminated sheet into my pocket. The first few hours were uneventful. I stocked shelves in the snack aisle, scanned a few straggler customers, and learned the layout of the store. The place had that stale, slightly metallic smell that all Walmarts seem to have, but something about it here felt stronger, almost sour, like old rainwater trapped in the walls. Around 11:50 I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping. I froze. The sound was coming from aisle 14, which I remembered was the toys section. I told myself it was just a shelf settling or maybe a rodent. Still, my heart sped up. Rule number 2 came back to me. If you hear knocking from aisle 14 after midnight, do not investigate. I forced myself to turn the other way, focusing on stocking soda bottles, but the knocking grew louder like knuckles against hollow wood. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I kept my eyes down, pretending I couldn't hear it. Eventually, the sound stopped, replaced by a low hum from somewhere in the ceiling. By 1 a.m., the store was nearly silent. Only 3 other employees were on duty. Ray from electronics, a tall, lanky guy who never smiled, Carla from the register, who had deep lines under her eyes like she hadn't slept in days, and Mrs. Greaves, who stayed mostly in the office, watching the security monitors. At 1:28 a.m., I made the mistake of walking past the back freezer. The air around it felt wrong, too cold, like stepping into the dead of winter. The door was slightly ajar, and a thin mist seeped out, curling along the floor. I thought about peeking inside, but the memory of rule number 10 stopped me. I pushed a shopping cart past it quickly, refusing to glance back. The first real scare came at 2:14 a.m. I was in the cereal aisle when the security cameras above me clicked loudly. They whirred, shifting their angles, even though no one was in the control room. One of them stopped and pointed directly at me. I remembered rule number 1, never look at the security cameras between 2:13 and 2:17. I dropped my gaze to the floor, but I could feel the lens on me, following me as I slowly walked to the next aisle. My hands were shaking, and a strange static filled my ears. Somewhere in the distance, the intercom crackled, but no words came through, just a long, drawn-out hiss. When the cameras finally clicked back into their normal positions, the static faded. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. At 3:02 a.m., I passed the greeter station on my way to the break room. The greeter was an old man named Earl, who I'd met earlier in the night. He'd seemed friendly enough, though he spoke in short sentences, as if saving his voice. Now, however, he was standing perfectly still, facing me. His eyes were wide, and his smile was too large, stretching in a way that didn't seem human. Rule number 3, do not make eye contact with the greeter after 3 a.m. I looked past him, focusing on a stack of plastic bins. I could feel him staring as I walked by. Just before I reached the break room door, I heard him whisper something in a low, rasping voice. I didn't catch the words, but I knew better than to turn around. The rest of the shift was a blur of uneasy silence and distant noises I tried to ignore. By the time the sun started to rise, I was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. The rules had seemed absurd when I first read them, but after one night, I understood they were there for a reason. As I clocked out, Mrs. Greaves handed me a fresh copy of the list. This one had a new rule scrawled in red ink at the bottom. 11. If you hear someone calling your name from outside the store between 4 and 5 a.m., do not answer. I frowned. Why wasn't this here before? She looked at me for a long moment, her lips pressed tight. Because now, she said quietly, they know you're here. The drive home after that first night felt longer than it should have. Oak Hollow's roads were nearly deserted at that hour, the street lamps barely cutting through the heavy mist that rolled off the bayou. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Earl's unnatural smile reflected back at me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was turning a pale gray. I locked my door, drew the blinds, and collapsed into bed. But even with the blankets pulled over my head, sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about that last rule Mrs. Greaves had added in red ink, the way she'd said they knew I was here. When I woke that evening, the world outside my window was bathed in the amber glow of a Louisiana sunset. For a moment, I considered not going back. I could just call and say the job wasn't for me. But the truth was, I needed the money. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and jobs in Oak Hollow were scarce. Besides, maybe it had all been some elaborate hazing ritual. The second night began the same as the first. The parking lot was mostly empty, the flickering streetlights casting distorted shadows across the cracked pavement. I stepped inside and found the store almost identical to how I'd left it, dim, quiet, and faintly smelling of mildew. Mrs. Greaves didn't greet me this time. Instead, Ray waved me over to electronics. His long fingers tapped nervously on the counter as he leaned toward me. "You read the rules, right?" he asked in a low voice. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "I followed them." His eyes darted toward the ceiling, where one of the cameras was slowly sweeping the aisle. "Good. Don't slip, not even once. You think they're just here? They're not. They follow." Before I could ask what he meant, the overhead lights flickered twice, then steadied. Ray stiffened, muttered something under his breath, and walked away quickly. For the first half of my shift, things were calm. I restocked paper towels, helped a late-night shopper find a toolbox, and swept up a broken jar of pickles. But just after 1:15 a.m., I made the mistake of going near the freezer again. The air back there was colder than last time, sharp and biting against my skin. The door was shut now, but a faint, steady thumping came from inside, slow, deliberate, like someone knocking from the other side. I took a step back, every instinct telling me to leave. That's when I heard it. Eli. The voice was muffled, but clear enough to make my stomach drop. It was my name. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a stack of crates. The voice came again, slightly louder. Eli, help me. My hands were shaking. Rule 10 said not to go near the freezer after 1:30 a.m. It was only 1:18. Technically, I wasn't breaking it. But another rule, the new one, flashed in my mind. If you hear someone calling your name from outside the store between 4 and 5 a.m., do not answer. This wasn't outside. This was here. Still, every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the freezer until I rounded the corner. When I turned back, the thumping had stopped. By 2:13 a.m., I was in the canned goods aisle, well away from the cameras. The rules said not to look at them, but that didn't stop me from noticing when they moved. One near the end of the aisle swiveled sharply, pointing not at me, but toward the far end where the shelves curved out of sight. I strained to hear something, footsteps, rustling, but the store was silent. Then faintly, I heard the squeak of a cart's wheels. It rolled into view slowly, emerging from the shadows. The cart was empty, but it kept moving toward me, one wheel squealing every few seconds. Rule 4, if you see a shopping cart moving on its own, ignore it. I turned away, pretending to reorganize a stack of soup cans. The squeak grew louder as the cart drew closer. My pulse pounded in my ears. Without looking, I stepped aside, letting it pass me. It rolled down the aisle and out of sight. But when I finally dared to glance back, it was gone. The aisle behind me was empty. At 2:45, I stopped by the break room for coffee. Carla was sitting at the table, staring at the wall. She didn't look up when I came in. You shouldn't drink that tonight, she said softly. I froze mid-pour. Why not? They'll smell it on you, she said, her voice trembling, and they like the smell. Before I could ask who she meant, the intercom crackled to life. Clean up on aisle 0. The words were slow, distorted, almost mechanical. Carla's eyes went wide. She stood so quickly her chair toppled over. Break room, I followed her as she slammed the door and locked it. She turned off the lights and pressed a finger to her lips. We stood there in darkness, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then came the sound, wet, dragging footsteps moving through the store. They were slow, deliberate, and each one seemed to echo far longer than it should have. Something scraped against the floor, like a heavy sack being pulled along. The sound passed the break room door, pausing for a moment on the other side. I held my breath, afraid even the smallest sound might draw it closer. The air in the room felt thicker, heavier, as if the thing outside was sucking it in. After what felt like hours, the footsteps moved on. The intercom clicked again, and a static-filled voice muttered something unintelligible. Carla didn't unlock the door until 15 minutes later. When we stepped out, the store looked exactly the same, except for a long, dark streak on the linoleum stretching from aisle 1 toward the back of the store. At 3:05, I passed Earl again. This time, I didn't just avoid his eyes, I avoided even looking in his direction, but I still felt him turn to watch me. Near the end of my shift at exactly 4:12 a.m., I was stocking detergent when I heard it. Eli. The voice was outside this time, just beyond the sliding glass doors. Eli, it's me. You left your phone in the parking lot. Come get it. The voice was my mother's, perfectly familiar, perfectly warm. My mother lived 200 miles away. I gripped the box of detergent so hard my knuckles ached. Rule 11 burned in my mind. Do not answer. But the voice kept calling, gentle at first, then sharper. Eli, come on, don't be rude. I'm right here. When I didn't move, the voice changed. It grew deeper, rougher, almost mocking. Eli, Eli, Eli. The repetition grew faster until it was a rasping chant. Then it stopped abruptly. When I dared to look toward the doors, the parking lot was empty. The sun was rising by the time I clocked out. Mrs. Greaves was waiting for me at the door. She studied my face for a long moment, as if searching for something. You lasted, she said. That's good. I didn't feel good. I felt drained, my head pounding. What happens if someone doesn't follow the rules? I asked. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. They don't finish the shift. I was halfway to my car when I saw it, my name tag lying in the middle of the parking lot. When I bent to pick it up, I noticed something else. The silver pin Mrs. Greaves always wore, shaped like that strange insect, was now on the ground next to it. But when I looked back toward the store, she was gone. When I got home that morning, I didn't sleep right away. I sat in the dark living room, the curtains drawn, staring at my name tag on the coffee table. The edges were scratched, as if someone had been scraping at it with something sharp. I kept thinking about the silver pin I'd found next to it, Mrs. Greaves's insect-shaped charm. It wasn't just an accessory. Something about it felt important, like it was part of whatever kept her safe in that store. By the time my alarm went off for my third shift, I was already on edge. The moment I stepped into the Walmart parking lot, I saw her waiting by the front doors. She didn't say hello. She just handed me a new name tag in a small velvet pouch. "Keep that with you tonight," she said. "Don't open it. Don't lose it." I started to ask what it was, but she cut me off. "If the freezer opens, you'll need it." Her words hit me hard. I hadn't told her about the thumping or the voice calling my name. The store felt heavier that night. The air was thicker, the shadows darker. Even the background hum of the lights seemed lower, like a constant, deep vibration in the walls. Ray was in electronics again, pacing back and forth. He glanced at me when I walked by. "Don't go near the back tonight," he muttered. "Something's wrong." I wanted to press him for details, but before I could, the intercom crackled and Mrs. Greaves's voice came through, her tone sharp. "Eli, front of the store, now." I met her at the greeter station. Earl wasn't there. "He's not coming in tonight," she said before I could ask. That's not good news. It was 11:42 p.m. when the first odd thing happened. I was in aisle 14, the toys aisle. The rule said never to investigate knocking after midnight, but I'd never been there before the cutoff. I figured it was safe. The shelves were lined with plastic dolls, stuffed animals, and rows of boxed board games. The air was still. I was stocking puzzles when one of the dolls, big glassy eyes, stiff yellow hair, tipped forward on its shelf. I caught it before it fell, but when I set it back, its head turned toward me. I froze. I told myself it was just loose joints. Then, from the far end of the aisle, I heard the knocking. 3 slow, heavy raps. It wasn't midnight yet, but the sound was exactly like before. I backed out of the aisle, refusing to look in that direction. The knocking followed me into the next aisle, echoing along the shelves. When it finally stopped, I realized I'd been gripping the velvet pouch in my pocket without thinking. At 1:29 a.m., I was in the cereal aisle when the temperature dropped. Not just cooler, freezing. My breath fogged in front of me. Somewhere down the back hallway, metal creaked. Then I heard it, a soft hiss, like frost forming on glass. I turned and saw the freezer door was open. Not just ajar, wide open. A pale mist spilled out, curling across the floor like fingers. The inside was pitch black, far darker than any freezer should be. And from that blackness, something moved. I couldn't make out its shape at first, only the sound. Wet, deliberate steps. The mist curled around a long, narrow arm as it reached the doorway. The skin was the color of freezer-burned meat, stretched too thin over bone. It stopped at the threshold, as if testing the air. Then it spoke. "Eli, come in here. It's warm inside." The voice wasn't my mother's this time. It was my own, perfectly matching my tone, my inflection. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt heavy. My own voice came again, softer now, coaxing. "You're cold out there. Just one step." I gripped the velvet pouch. It pulsed faintly in my hand, a slow, steady throb. Without thinking, I yanked the string and opened it. Inside was a small silver charm identical to the one Mrs. Greaves wore. The moment I pulled it out, the thing in the doorway stopped moving. It tilted its head slowly, like a predator studying something it didn't understand. Then it hissed, a sound that was neither human nor animal, and retreated into the darkness. The freezer door slammed shut so hard the metal frame rattled. I stood there shaking, clutching the charm so tightly it cut into my palm. When I told Mrs. Greaves what happened, she didn't look surprised. "That's why we have the rule," she said simply. "They can't cross the threshold without an invitation, but sometimes they try to trick you into giving it." I asked her what was inside the freezer, but she didn't answer. She just told me to keep the charm on me at all times. At 2:13 a.m., the cameras shifted again. I dropped my gaze immediately, focusing on the floor tiles. But this time I could feel more than just the lens watching me. Something else was looking through them. The air felt wrong, too still. The static in my ears rose until it drowned out everything else. Then, faintly, I heard a whisper. Not through the intercom. Not in the store. Inside my head. You shouldn't have the charm, Eli. The voice was low, wet, and close. I didn't respond. I just walked, one slow step at a time, until the cameras clicked back into their normal positions. At 3 a.m., Earl's replacement finally showed up. A young woman I'd never seen before. She didn't wear a name tag, and she didn't smile. She just stood at the greeter's podium, facing the automatic doors. I tried to pass without looking at her, but something about her posture made me pause. Her hands were clasped too tightly, the knuckles white. And when she turned her head slightly, I saw her eyes were completely black. I didn't stay to see more. By 4:20 a.m., I was counting the minutes until I could leave. That's when the voice came again, this time from somewhere deep inside the store. Eli. It wasn't outside. It wasn't the freezer. It was coming from the aisles. I stood frozen, listening. The voice was moving, getting closer, passing aisle after aisle until it stopped just around the corner from where I stood. Then, slowly, a hand curled around the end of the shelf. It wasn't human. The skin was thin and pale, and the fingers which were too long, bending at unnatural angles. Before it could step into view, the lights flickered 3 times. Rule 9. When the lights flicker 3 times, lock yourself in the restroom until they stop. I bolted. My shoes squeaked against the linoleum as I sprinted toward the restroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. The lights above me hummed weakly, flickering in irregular bursts. Each time they went out, I swore I could hear something breathing just outside the door. When the flickering finally stopped, I stayed put for another 5 minutes before unlocking the door. The hallway was empty. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted, the charm still clutched in my hand. As I clocked out, Mrs. Greaves stopped me. You did well tonight, she said. Then she leaned closer. But tomorrow, there'll be a new rule. When I came in for my 4th shift, the first thing I noticed was that the laminated rule sheet had changed. At the bottom, under the red ink rule about voices outside, there was a fresh addition, written in the same sharp handwriting. 12. Avoid all mirrors between midnight and 4 a.m. If you must pass one, do not look directly at your reflection. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. I couldn't remember any mirrors in the store, but Mrs. Greaves was standing right there when I read it. They're not normal mirrors, she said, and they're not always there. What do you mean, not always there? I asked. You'll see, she said, and walked away. It was barely 10:30 p.m., and already I felt like something in the store was watching me. Not just from the cameras, something closer, moving between the aisles like it belonged here. The night started normally enough. I stocked shelves, avoided aisle 14, kept far away from the back freezer. The velvet pouch was still in my pocket, the silver charm inside warm from being in my hand most of the day. At 11:47 p.m., I passed the cosmetics aisle. That's when I saw it. A mirror, tall, oval, framed in black metal, stood at the far end, leaning against the shelf. It didn't belong there. I'd been through this aisle dozens of times and never seen it before. I slowed, my breath catching. My reflection stared back at me, but there was something wrong with it. The lighting was the same. My clothes were the same, but my face, it was smiling. I wasn't smiling. My lips were pressed tight, my jaw tense, but the reflection grinned wide, showing too many teeth. I turned away quickly, walking fast until I was clear of the aisle. Rule 12 made sense now. Just after midnight, the first noise came from the electronics section, Ray shouting something I couldn't make out. I jogged over and found him standing rigid, staring at one of the large flat-screen TVs on display. The screen was off, but faintly, in the black reflection, his image was moving. The reflected Ray raised its hand and pressed it to the glass. The real Ray didn't move, but I could see sweat running down his face. "Don't let it touch you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He blinked, then stepped back. The reflection kept its hand against the glass for a moment longer before slowly lowering it. Then it turned its head in a way the real Ray didn't, and looked straight at me. The TVs all went black. By 1:10 a.m., mirrors had appeared in other places. One in the shoe aisle, one near the garden section, another beside the freezer door. Every time I caught sight of them, the reflection inside wasn't quite right. Sometimes it moved slower, sometimes faster. Sometimes it didn't move at all, just stood there staring while I passed. At 1:35 a.m., the freezer door rattled. I didn't stop to look. The intercom crackled at 2:02 a.m. Clean up on aisle 0. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the break room, locked the door, and sat in the dark with Carla and Ray. We could hear it again, those dragging wet footsteps, and this time, something else, a faint tapping sound. It took me a minute to realize the tapping wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the break room. I turned my head slowly toward the vending machine in the corner. The glass front reflected all three of us sitting in the dark. Only in the reflection, there was a fourth figure, tall, thin, with its face turned toward me. I squeezed my eyes shut and gripped the charm. The tapping stopped. When Mrs. Greaves finally gave the all clear, the vending machine glass was empty again. At 3:06 a.m., I made the mistake of cutting through the cosmetics aisle again. The oval mirror was still there. This time, my reflection wasn't smiling, it was crying. Fat, dark tears ran down its cheeks, staining the shirt I wore in the reflection. I took a step closer without meaning to. In the glass, my reflection mouthed words I couldn't hear. Then slowly, it reached into its own pocket and pulled out a silver charm, identical to mine. The charm in the mirror began to glow faintly. Mine in my hand grew warm, almost hot. I forced myself to look away and leave, but the warmth in my palm didn't fade for the rest of the night. At 4:14 a.m., the voice came again from outside. "Ella, your father's here." My father had been dead for 8 years. I didn't answer. I kept my head down, stocking the detergent aisle until my shift ended. But the moment I stepped into the parking lot, I saw it, standing by my car. It looked like my father. Same height, same hair, same clothes he used to wear when we'd go fishing. He smiled and raised his hand like he always did when he saw me. "Son," he said, voice exactly the same as I remembered. "You left something inside. I'll walk with you to get it." Every muscle in my body locked up. I gripped the silver charm in my pocket and got in my car without a word. When I looked in the rearview mirror, he was gone. But my reflection was still smiling. The moment the lights cut out, the store felt like it had been swallowed by something ancient and hungry. The faint glow from the emergency exit signs barely reached beyond a few feet, leaving most of the aisles in a suffocating black. My ears were ringing with silence, except it wasn't silence. It was the kind of quiet that felt alive, as if something was holding its breath right alongside me. I stood frozen behind the customer service desk, gripping the crowbar I'd swiped from the hardware aisle. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but the rules ran through my head again, stubborn and cold. If the lights go out, do not move until they come back on. Do not run. Do not call out. From somewhere deep in the store, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I forced myself to stand still. My palms were slick, and the crowbar's metal felt like ice in my grip. I remembered how Rule Number 7 warned, they hear movement better than they see you. That they was now close enough that I could hear the faint rasp of its breath, long, slow inhales, like it was smelling me. Then a whisper. It was so faint I thought it was my imagination. But no, it came again, raspy, drawn out, and close enough that I could feel the air shift against my ear. Leave, before they keep you. I wanted to whirl around to see who or what was speaking, but I didn't. My muscles locked in place. The voice was right next to me one moment, then gone the next, like it had dissolved into the dark. The footsteps began again, heading away from me, but there was no relief in that. I caught movement, a shape so tall its head nearly brushed the ceiling tiles, sliding between aisles like a shadow wearing something vaguely human. After what felt like an eternity, the lights flickered back on. The store looked exactly the same, except for the wet footprints leading from the toys section toward the stockroom. Each print was misshapen, like something with too many toes had walked barefoot through water. I thought about calling the manager, Henry, but remembered the walkie-talkie was still in my locker. That meant I had to go to the break room, which meant passing the toy aisle. I told myself not to look down that aisle. I failed. Every bike, doll, and action figure was turned to face the main walkway, as if they were watching me. Their eyes, plastic but somehow knowing, followed me until I stepped into the break room. The locker room smelled wrong. The usual mix of stale coffee and old mop water had been replaced by something metallic and sweet, like copper. My stomach turned as I realized there was a wet trail leading to my locker. The padlock was hanging open, twisted out of shape. Inside, my walkie-talkie sat on top of my jacket. The static was already hissing. I picked it up. "Don't let them in." The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the crackle, but it was urgent. Before I could respond, the break room door creaked open. I spun around and froze. It was Henry. At least it looked like Henry. But his skin was pale, stretched too tight over his bones, and his eyes were the wrong color, milky white with no pupils. He smiled at me, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. "You broke the rules, Jack." I stepped back, bumping against the lockers. "No, I didn't." "You looked," he said. His voice had a wet, gurgling undertone. "You always look." Something moved behind him. Shadows bleeding across the floor, curling around his legs like smoke. The thing I'd seen earlier in the aisles rose from the darkness, towering over him. "Time to stay," Henry said, and his mouth stretched into something that wasn't a human smile anymore. I bolted for the back door, ignoring rule number 5, never use the rear exit after midnight. The second I hit the alley behind the store, the air changed. It was heavier, thicker, like I'd stepped underwater. My ears popped, and the world went too quiet. I realized I wasn't alone. Figures stood at the far end of the alley. They were human shapes, but wrong. Limbs too long, heads cocked at unnatural angles. They moved in short, twitchy bursts, closing the distance without taking a single full step. I turned back toward the door, but it was gone. Just a solid wall of brick where it should have been. The figures stopped about 20 feet away. Then, in perfect unison, they tilted their heads toward the store, as if urging me to go back inside. A cold hand brushed my shoulder. I didn't want to turn. I knew it was Henry, but when I finally did, it wasn't Henry. It was my own reflection, staring at me from inches away. Its smile was wide, its eyes hollow. The world blinked. I was standing in aisle 7, the crowbar still in my hands. The store lights were bright. Customers were walking past me, chatting casually as if nothing had happened. Henry was behind the counter, looking perfectly normal. I must have looked terrified because he frowned. "You okay, Jack?" I didn't answer. I dropped the crowbar and walked toward the exit. But when I stepped outside, I wasn't in the parking lot. I was in the break room again, staring at my locker. The padlock was hanging open. The walkie-talkie hissed to life. "They don't let you leave." I screamed, but it came out silent. The lights flickered and went out. And that's where our night shift ends. For now. If you enjoyed this chilling journey, make sure to hit that like button, share the story with fellow horror lovers, and subscribe to Dr. Snooze for more spine-tingling tales every week. Until next time, keep your eyes open, follow the rules, and whatever you do, don't look behind you.